and welcome to the third and final mini episode of this series on dispute resolution involving fiduciary structure. I should say dispute prevention, because we love to prevent what doesn't have to occur. So in other words, what are the do's and don'ts of foundation planning? We've covered the cultural alignment and jurisdictional comparison in earlier episodes that you can see here. Now it's about putting these lessons into practice on how to balance flexibility, certainty, cultural alignment that we touched upon as a theme, actually implementing structure.
Yeah, exactly. So this session is really about the kind of practical guardrails that advisors should keep in mind, what to encourage and what to avoid, so that foundations don't just look good on paper, but they actually hold up over time.
So let's go do's and don'ts slide. The human element, law and culture. What are the main do's and don'ts in this context?
Okay, so the first do is to map the founder's objectives against family expectations. It sounds pretty simple, but it's often missed. If the founder's vision of like control or succession doesn't actually align with how the family actually operates day to day, you're just setting up tension from the start.
Yeah.
And respect collective versus individual wealth traditions. As we've discussed, like in earlier episodes, many Middle Eastern and Asian families, they view wealth as a collective. It's something that belongs to the wider family. It's not belonging to the individual. Western advisors sometimes assume personal autonomy, but that can actually clash with long-standing expectations of hierarchy, stewardship, and mutual obligation that we see so often here. So embed cultural legitimacy directly into the structure. And you can do that quite easily through the bylaws, the distribution policy, and the composition of the council or the guardian board. And reflecting family governance values in those documents is really going to help prevent building resentment over time.
So we talked about some do's. Give me some don'ts.
Okay, don't rely purely on legal enforceability. Even if something is watertight under statute, perception still matters. And also don't ignore Sharia or forced heirship overlays. Even if the foundation technically overrides them, families can sometimes still feel tension between these religious duties and the legal freedom that they might have. And that can actually become the basis for emotional or even legal challenge later down the line. So advisors really need to make sure that those issues are properly ventilated, not avoided, so that everyone knows whether the foundation is intended to follow, adapt, or depart from traditional norms.
We have talked about how remarkably flexible the UAE Foundation regimes are in what they allow principals to do, typically families to keep control, keep it in the family, as they say. How do advisors balance flexibility and certainty when picking a jurisdiction?
It's difficult, and I think actually there's quite a sort of delicate balancing exercise that comes into play. So on the macro level, you've got issues such as reputation and stability, and they really count for quite a lot. And as you've mentioned, the sort of Global Financial Centers Index really highlights that jurisdictional credibility and perceived stability are increasingly decisive factors. So families and their banks are going to want to know that the structure sits somewhere predictable, well-regulated, and internationally recognized. And you've got the Western jurisdictions, so Jersey, Guernsey, Cayman, Switzerland, that really remain the benchmarks. They've got long track records, developed jurisprudence, and a really strong fiduciary duties baked into their systems. And then that brings predictability. But for some Middle Eastern families, those sort of jurisdictions can feel a little bit distant or foreign. And so the emerging regional hubs that we've been talking about, DIFC, DGM, and RAC ICC, they're closing that gap really fast. And those jurisdictions are being really, really creative in blending that Western-style governance with the local cultural familiarity. And they're really helping make those jurisdictions a natural choice for regionally based families who want to hold domestic assets in particular in a familiar legal environment. And their legislation is modern. Their courts are internationally respected. And importantly, both the DIFC and the ADGM feature really prominently in the GFCI 38 rankings for stability, regulatory quality, and governance infrastructure.
I fully second that. I'm a big fan of what this country is doing. And of course, we are a key player in this market. So are you. But I'll put that in a bigger context. When I go to a bank, I do care they have been in business for 700 years, but I care more about what business and vision they have for the next 15. Do they have a digital interface? How do they deal with new type of assessment, etc.? If I buy a car, I buy a Tesla or something electric. I do not necessarily buy a Saab 9000 CD from the 80s. If I buy a phone, I'd love it to be a mobile instead of something on the wall. So I make myself the devil's advocate here. But those frameworks are newer. Do they pose a risk?
So I think it depends on perspective. So yes, the case law is less mature. So there's less precedent that you can rely on to predict outcomes. But actually, you've got a judiciary that is able to interpret law, and the foundation regime and legislation actually offers such a huge amount of flexibility and really modern drafting. So there's a lot of scope for sort of new thinking and really matching modern day expectations within the legal boundaries. So for me, I think the key is really recognizing those trade-offs early and to document the rationale. For example, if you really want to sort of go back in the traditional jurisdictions like Guernsey or Jersey, that's absolutely fine. Just document it, talk to the families so everyone's clear. But if you want to take advantage of the DIFC, ADGM, RAC, and the sort of modern flexibility in the drafting that the Foundation and Trust Law offers, that's equally great. And again, just make sure that's been discussed with the family.
Succession is always tied up with governance, particularly in privately owned groups, which end up having an investment arm. So what are the typical do's that you would recommend to families on the governance and succession front?
Yeah, so I think these issues around control and continuity are where advisors can really help prevent a lot of future litigation down the line just by being pretty explicit. So I guess one of the do's, do create clear power schedules, I guess, setting out what the founder, the council, the guardian can actually do and what happens if they're going to disagree. And I guess another do is make sure there is a really defined succession plan for each key office and for how distributions are going to be handled over time. And one more do, if I can, actually, do include a mechanism for breaking deadlocks if they arise, because deadlocks can really paralyze situations and again will cause a dispute down the line.
And what do you see as the common mistakes as opposed to these do's?
So I guess one common mistake is to kind of leave too much control with the patriarch or the matriarch without having a transition plan in place. And that's obviously particularly prevalent in our region with the Wells transition that's happening, because once the sort of the founders, the patriarch and matriarch, are gone, like without a power sort of plan, it's going to create absolute chaos. You need to really make sure that roles going forward are not ambiguous. You want to make sure that everyone knows exactly who has responsibility and for what. Unclear responsibility is going to breed conflict. So if you don't define who's going to decide what, basically the courts are going to end up doing it for you.
Very topical. So now let's move to another topic that I would really like to stress here. It's because we talked about privacy. So which role do transparency and confidentiality play into that? And what are the do's and don'ts in that context?
Yeah, this is pretty tricky, getting the balance right.
Yep.
So do provide structured reporting, annual accounts, regular updates, and a clear protocol for information requests if they're made by beneficiaries. It's amazing how many disputes I've seen that begin with a simple lack of communication. Another do, manage expectations early on. Explain what information beneficiaries are actually entitled to and what they're not entitled to. And I guess a don't here, don't overpromise secrecy. So many jurisdictions now have beneficial ownership registers,
Yes.
and absolute confidentiality is just not going to be realistic. So you need to manage those expectations. And one more don't, I guess, here is don't hide information that beneficiaries might reasonably expect to get. As I've said before, secrecy breeds suspicion, and suspicion turns to litigation.
So, which is a perfect segue to the last topic I want to touch upon before closing is dispute prevention. What are the most important do's and don'ts from your perspective as a contentious lawyer in terms of preventing dispute? Give me a laundry list.
Okay, so I've said it before and I'm going to say it again and again. Stress test every single structure before it's finalized. Ask if someone's going to challenge it, what is the likely outcome? And within that, you're going to have to think about the particular challenge points, and every family is going to have different sort of weaknesses that you're really going to have to stress test. And then think about possible flashpoints.
Yep.
So are you in a situation where there could be competing heirs, where there could be cross-border assets or incompatible local laws? If so, deal with them in advance. Linked to that, I guess build in a tiered dispute resolution system if you can. So start with some kind of internal review, then maybe think about moving matters to mediation, then perhaps arbitration or a court if you want as a matter of last resort. But really you want to start with the internal processes to try and build consensus early within the family before things escalate.
Yeah.
And we mentioned it before, but the DIFC and the RAT clause, for instance, they're really arbitration friendly, and they really give families a private route to resolve disputes that the courts don't always do. And so for me, I think that's a really big advantage where sort of reputation or confidentiality matters most to a family. And I guess the don'ts, just important, don't assume that arbitration or courts are actually going to fix poor drafting. So the best time to manage disputes is before they arise, and getting all the drafting right early doors is really good. And I guess don't let disagreements go straight to litigation without having some kind of cooling off process. Because that's where relationships and reputations really break down.
It's exactly what I apply every day with my wife. So let's close with this. Big picture takeaways. If you had to sum up, what would be your and your firm's core principle of dispute mitigation in the context of structuring assets under fiduciary structures? What would that be?
Okay, so do align every structure with the family's values and their cultural expectations. Also, choose jurisdiction based not only on cost or reputation, but also on asset location, enforceability, and stability. And use the GFCI ranking as a proxy for long-term reliability, if you like.
Yeah.
Also, make sure you draft governance documents with absolute clarity. So that relates really to like powers, succession, duties, etc. And build in communication protocols so that you can really help foster trust. And then finally, again, stress test for inheritance overlays and local enforceability. And then I guess on the flip side, if you're looking at don'ts, don't pick a jurisdiction just for prestige.
Yes.
Don't leave the powers vague or overlapping. And don't ignore cultural or religious expectations just because the law can work around them. And then finally, don't assume the courts can fix a bad structure. Prevention is always going to be cheaper than cure.
So the structure is both a tool that can be super useful, but it's also a forum for transparency and people to communicate and manage expectation, yeah?
Yeah, I think really, if you think about it, a foundation should be both a legal structure, but perhaps more importantly, family contract, clear, balanced, and credible.
Fantastic. We made it through this mini-series. Nicole, once again, thank you very much for joining us here. If people have questions, they can, of course, DM us or send us an email and we relay that. This entire episode will be put into a write-up and we'll be posting on that. Nicole and your firm, thank you very much from us at MHQ. Bye-bye.
Thank you.